What is up, fellow writers? This is Jane for Story Kitchen, and there is a squirrel fight outside my window. So today at Story Kitchen, I want to give you the absolute beginner's guide to writing SFF Part 1. So if you've never written prose before, or if you're new to writing prose, this guide is for you. Part 1 of this series is going to be beneficial to you whether or not you write SFF or some other fiction, because there are a lot of general tips and tricks. I created this because I was seeing a lot of people ask in writing communities that I'm part of, how do I get started writing SFF? And I thought, wow, how do you get started writing SFF? How did I get started writing SFF? As always, with any kind of writing advice, this is a guide only. Your mileage may vary, everyone has a different process, blah, blah, blah. What works for me and for other people might not work for you. That said, I think guides like this can be useful for you to find out what your process is. So use this as kind of a guideline of a place to start, and you'll experiment and play with what your best process is for getting started in writing SFF. Okay, what is SFF? This is a good question because I feel like different people have different answers to that question. And again, my way is not the only way. In general, I feel like being too strict about taxonomy or categories can be limiting and not super helpful. So when I talk about SFF as a genre, let that genre be as fluid and as stretched out or as narrow and as rigid as is helpful for you. Definitions are essentially just tools for us anyway. So if it's helpful, I think of SFF as a big umbrella term that encompasses any kind of fiction that contains a speculative element. And this includes, for me, literary fiction as well, although I don't really want to get into a big, long discussion about literary fiction versus genre fiction because, again, for me personally, I don't find that distinction super useful. And plus, I'm seeing that in contemporary fiction, a lot of those genre boundaries are kind of getting blurred and crossed over all the time anyway, so I feel like it's not quite as important of a distinction as maybe it used to be in the past. And then the other thing I will say is that, especially when you're starting writing, I don't think it's particularly useful to worry that much about what genre you're writing in. Write the story that you want to write. Oh, excuse me. My dog wants to come in. Hold on.
Oh, look. Come on in, little buddy.
Okay, this is Bowie.
Hi.
He matches my shirt today. Or I match him, I guess. Because he can't change how he looks. Hi, little buddy. Okay, you want to sit on my lap while I finish this? So for me, I use SFF as an umbrella term that is roughly equivalent to speculative fiction, which is another pretty broad umbrella term that I like. So I use them interchangeably, SFF, speculative fiction. And for me, this encompasses a whole bunch of genres. Fantasy, science fiction, but also magical realism, fabulism, fairy tale retellings, alternate history, secondary world, weird fiction, slipstream, fairy tales, steampunk, cyberpunk, all the dash punks. All that stuff for me fits under speculative fiction. And there are some, of course, literary fiction novels that have speculative elements. Horror also is part of speculative fiction. So that's what I mean by SFF. One of the reasons that I love writing SFF, and I'm excited that you're excited to begin writing SFF, is that I feel like this genre is so broad and it's evolving all the time, and there's a lot of space to explore. There's a lot of opportunities for cross-genre blending or multi-genre blending, and pretty much at this point in contemporary SFF, kind of anything goes. So I feel like it's a really exciting space to play around. I also think that the readership for English language SFF is ever expanding globally. And that's super exciting to me too. If you're a writer who already knows how to write in another genre and you're looking specifically for what sets SFF apart from other genres, including literary fiction, romance, mystery, whatever, then you might find elements of this guide a little basic for you, because I'm going to go over some basic things for like the absolute beginner. So you might want to stick around for part 2. Tip number 1 is to read a lot. Read a lot in an intentional way. You can read for enjoyment, that's fine, obviously. Recently, I've heard some people say, why do I have to read if I want to write? I can be inspired by other genres or other forms of media like movies and anime and comic books and stuff. And that is totally true. But there's a difference between story and prose. And I believe that you can be inspired by storytelling and other forms of media, absolutely. But unless you read prose, you read the medium that you're working in, you're going to be at a little bit of a disadvantage when it comes to the technical side of learning how to put sentences together. And frankly, storytelling tools are really different in prose than they are in other forms of media. And I would say this too, even for other forms of writing, like script writing. Novel writing and short story writing are different skill sets. There's some overlap, sure. A sentence is put together in a similar way in novels and short stories, but in terms of how you structure it, what kinds of techniques you might want to employ, I found that for me at least, novel writing and short story writing were really, really different. So if you want to write short stories, read a lot of short stories. If you want to write novels, read a lot of novels and pay attention to the technical side of it. And I mean, really, starting with the basics. How does the text indicate who is speaking? Some beginner prose writers I've seen have a lot of problem with dialogue tags. It's just a technical skill that you learn, and you'll learn it if you read a lot of novels that have dialogue in them, and you'll figure out how dialogue attribution works, and you'll kind of internalize that. How is the dialogue formatted? How do you know what the setting is, right? How does the writer convey setting details to you? How do you feel about the characters and why? What is the writer doing to make you feel certain ways about the characters? Whose perspective or point of view or POV, you'll probably hear it shortened to POV. Whose POV are we in, and how do you know? How does the writer let you know? How do you know when we switch POVs if this is a multi-POV story? Pay attention to these. These are technical aspects of prose that I think are specific and unique in the way that they work to fiction as opposed to other forms of media and storytelling. How does the writer reveal what each character is thinking or feeling? Do they just come out and tell you? Are there other cues? How do you know? Again, a specific thing to prose writing. And what about imagery? How does the writer engage your senses? How does the choice of imagery contribute to the mood, the atmosphere, the feeling, the theme, the meaning of the overall story, right? So the technical side of writing has actually not a lot to do with storytelling. Like, you can be an amazing storyteller in any medium, in some other medium, and not be a very good prose writer yet. Again, it's just a set of skills. It's like learning how to paint in watercolor versus oils. You might be able to compose a beautiful picture and have a beautiful theme, but unless you master the specific technique of watercolor, which is really, really, really different from I'm not an artist, but from my limited practice, it's a really different technique, and it requires a different set of technical skills. I'm going to include a list of places where you can read SFF short stories. And I do like short stories for getting started because it's less intimidating than a novel. Ultimately, if you only want to write novels, that's totally cool. You don't feel like you have to write short stories in order to write novels. That's not how it works. Just go ahead and write the novel. But if you're kind of like, hey, I want to get started writing SFF and I'm not sure if I like short stories or novels or maybe both, then I would say start with short stories because they're short and you could read a bunch of them in the amount of time it would take you to read one novel, and you could write a bunch of them in the amount of time it would take you to write one novel, which can take multiple years. Sob. #writing it's hard. Right, but you could write a short story in like a weekend and have it finished. And that's kind of awesome. So anyway, the next step for you, you might have guessed this, because after reading a lot comes writing a lot. So practice writing a lot. In the beginning, you don't even have to write short stories. I firmly believe that any kind of writing contributes to building your skill set. And I'll sort of talk more about what forms of writing you might want to explore and how to stay motivated. But basically, you want to just get into the habit of writing. You're kind of building up your skills, but also your endurance. Because to be honest, sitting down at a desk and writing for like hours a day is really tiring. And it's not good for your body, right? Like, humans are not made to sit. So part of this is actually a physical endurance kind of thing, like training yourself to kind of do that. I'm not a believer in you have to write every day, but I am a big believer in writing regularly so that you can build the practice. It's kind of like exercise. Right? You don't literally have to exercise every single day, but for some people it works to do like 10 minutes of exercise per day. And for other people, they like to go for like a 90-minute session of exercise, twice a week or something. Whatever kind of writer you are, just figure out some way to incorporate that kind of practice into your life and experiment and see what works best for you. Some methods you might employ to get you writing and get you motivated. You could try writing in a journal. That totally counts. Keep a diary, keep a journal, write down memories, childhood memories, write down your dreams. This is such a great source of like mining your subconscious for ideas. So I'm a big believer in trying to write down your dreams if you remember them. And the more you do it, the more you will remember your dreams and write them down. You could also practice more formally with exercise books like Ursula LeGuin's Steering the Craft, which is a wonderful exercise book. It's full of sort of prompts that help you develop your prose writing skills. It's not really for stories, but it's really more for like discovering your voice as a writer and what kinds of sentences you like to put together and how you structure scenes and stuff like that. I think it's great. There's also the 3 a.m. Epiphany book. I will link those below so you have those. Tip number 2 on this: consider taking a creative writing class if you are the kind of person that likes classes and a little structure and deadlines and things like that, plus a community of people to write with. Your local community college, if you are in the United States, probably has some affordable creative writing classes, which I think could be really helpful. Some universities have extension programs. There's also a lot of online courses. Try to find one that fits with your time and your budget. And even if the class itself is fairly basic, just the act of going to the class, some people find extremely motivational. I know I do, when I know that I have something I have to turn in to a class, even though it's totally voluntary. I think it can be really helpful. Caveat to that point number 2 is don't take a screenwriting class. I'm based in LA, and there are so many writing classes that are actually screenwriting classes. That is a different skill set. It is a wonderful skill set. It is not the same as prose writing, however. And maybe I'll do a whole other video on the differences, but yeah, so don't take screenwriting classes if you want to learn prose. Number 3, places you can go to find online writing prompts, which can be really helpful if you just want to look up a prompt and have that stimulate your writing session for the day. Set a timer. I love doing like 5-minute sprints. I think that's really great. Point number 4, do not judge any of these exercises. I guarantee you that some of these exercises are going to churn out writing that you are embarrassed by and that you think is crappy. That's okay. They're just exercises. You're like doing your writer bicep curls, okay? Not everyone has to be perfect. It's okay. It's an exercise. No one has to see these but you. And I will put a link below to some writing workshops and places where you can find prompts and writing exercises and stuff like that. This next section is about ways to stay motivated, because I've told you you should build a writing practice and you're like, Jane, that sounds great. But sometimes I'm tired and I don't know how to write and I don't have any motivation. I totally get you. For me, motivation is not about discipline. It's about systems and practices and habits. And for me, that's the only way that I'm able to get myself motivated to do anything at all. So I'm going to share with you some places where I've been able to find some motivation, and I know other writers have too, and you should check them out if that's the kind of thing you're looking for. The first is NaNoWriMo. NaNoWriMo stands for National Novel Writing Month, and it starts in November, which is coming up soon, so that's awesome. They also run NaNoWriMo camps in April and July. And this is a great place to find other writers, to connect. It's an online community. Back when we were able to meet up in person, people would have in-person meetups, and I'm sure they will again, and there are now Zoom meetups for writing. The goal is to write a certain number of words per day, but honestly, I use NaNoWriMo and I hack it to meet my own writing goals because I don't always need to work on a novel. Sometimes I'm working on a series of short stories or other things. So I just use it as kind of a motivation to keep going and keep writing and be part of the community. And it can be really wonderful to feel like I am part of this intense experience along with all these other people for a month. And it's only a month, which feels doable. A lot of times we cannot sustain the same pace that we find at NaNoWriMo time, where I'm writing like 1,500 to 2,000 words a day, which is a lot for me. I might be able to do it for the month of November, but after that I'm like done, that's it, I can't do anymore. And that's okay. That said, if NaNoWriMo is not for you, then it's not for you, and that's okay too. There are some years where I have skipped on Nano or I've hacked it so far that it doesn't even look like Nano anymore. And that's totally fine too. It doesn't work for everybody. Journaling. I mentioned this before. I find that it helps me work out some vague story ideas that I might be playing with. It also helps me put myself back in touch with some of my thoughts and feelings. It helps me remember some key memories that I might use for scenes or stories later. Things that are important to me. And I think especially when I was starting out writing and I was sort of still figuring out what kind of writer I am and what kinds of things I was interested in and why I was writing at all. You know, that's something sometimes we have to ask ourselves, why am I doing this? It's so hard. Journaling helped me get back in touch with those and helped me discover what themes I thought were important and why. The third way to motivate yourself is fan fiction. I love fan fiction, and a lot of professional writers write fan fiction. They either started writing fan fiction or are still writing fan fiction. Sometimes when I felt like I had nothing in me, I had no way I could work on this story that was giving me so much trouble, I would take refuge in writing a little bit of fluff fan fiction. And it is not wasted time, right? It is, you are still building your writing skills, you're still engaging with those writing muscles, and I found it deeply comforting and motivating, and it helped me get back to my work in progress when the work in progress was being mean to me and demanding things of me that I couldn't give it yet. I would go to fan fiction for a little bit of support and then go back to my work in progress. So that might work for you if you are into fan fiction. And finally, this isn't really a tip, or maybe it is, but it's believe in yourself. That's all I got. Believe in yourself and just keep going. Even when it seems hard and even when you feel like, God, I really suck at this. You might suck at this or you might not. Or there may be days that you suck and days when you're brilliant. You kind of don't know until you keep going. And in the beginning, everyone sucks at this. Like, we don't sit down at a piano for the first time ever in our lives and expect to play Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata flawlessly, right? So why do we put that kind of pressure on ourselves when we're writing? And somehow everything we write is going to turn out like our favorite author's work, when our favorite author has probably been doing it for decades. And we've only been doing it for however long. You will get better. Writing is a skill. The writer Kat Rambo always said, and by the way, if you have a chance to take some of Kat Rambo's classes, I highly recommend them. She's a great teacher. She's so supportive. Her tips are very practical and applicable. But Kat Rambo always said, you either have to be very, very talented or you have to work really hard. Work your ass off, I think is her actual quote. And the fact is, most of us fall in the latter category. We just have to work our asses off. And talent Even if you are talented, I believe that talent only gets you so far. All right, my next tip for you is once you've built this habit and you've built some sort of motivational practice and you're starting to read short stories. By the way, none of these steps are sequential. I'm not the boss of you. You're the boss of you. You do these steps in whatever order feels good to you, or do them all at once. Whatever works. The next thing that I'm going to talk to you about is write something to the end. And this is why I suggest that you start with short stories, because to write a novel to the end can take a while. I know it does for me. Maybe you're really fast. But a short story, you can write to the end of a flash fiction piece in a couple hours. It might not be good. That's okay. It doesn't have to be good. We're not talking good. Just get to the end. Finish something. That is going to teach you so much about your process, about your story, about how you approach writing. Now, this is advice that I tell myself all the time because I have this terrible problem of starting things and then not knowing how to finish them. It's just really awful. It's something I keep working on, and I'm continuing to work on it for myself because it is a real weakness, which is why I am begging you, pleading with you to just please finish something. Write in an ending, brainstorm a bunch of endings, pick one and just write it. Don't worry about whether it is the right ending or the perfect ending or the best ending. In the beginning, just write the ending. The ending will let you know whether it kind of works or doesn't, and you can always go back and pick another kind of ending or brainstorm a new one, but please just write to the end. That is maybe my biggest tip for you and for myself, because I am bad. So when I get stuck on the ending, which is all the time, these are some of the questions that I ask myself. 1, who is the main character in this story? Hopefully that's obvious, but sometimes it's not. What do they want and what do they need? That can help guide what's going to happen at the ending. The next question I ask myself, so what is the speculative element in this? How does that complicate my main character's situation or complicate their want or need? Finally, how could the main character resolve their situation? And this is where I brainstorm a bunch of different ways that the main character might be able to get themselves to the end. Do they get what they want? Yes or no? Do they get what they need? And how? Again, don't worry about the story, whether your story is good or bad. That is a problem for future you. Right now, you just want to get to the end. My next tip for you, I forget what number we're on, maybe find some other people to write with. Some of us work really well when we're writing together or with groups or with a partner. And I don't mean literally writing together, working on one project together, but rather just finding spaces where you can co-write or co-work. And that can be really helpful. Or even you're not even sharing the same time, but maybe you exchange manuscripts every once in a while and cheer each other on. That can be really helpful. So here are some suggestions. The first I already mentioned, co-writing and commiserating. Writing can be extremely isolating, it can be lonely, and did I mention that it's really hard and demoralizing sometimes and you feel like you're crap at it and you can't get better? Well, guess what? Having some co-writers will help you through these tough moments because you can commiserate together. You can even brainstorm sometimes. Let's say you're stuck on endings like I am often. If you have a group of writers that you write with, you could say, hey, can I run these endings past you and see what you think? You can have them read your work. Really, it could just be a social network and support network. The second way that you could find people, and again, none of these are mutually exclusive. You could do all of these at the same time, obviously, if you have the time. The second is to join a critique group or a workshop group. A critique group is typically a group that is somewhat self-organized. It's a little bit decentralized. There's often no formal program, although there may be some guidelines about how they operate. These are often ad hoc groups that spring up. You might find them on meetup.org. You may find them in other writing communities and forums that you're part of or you become part of, or you could start one yourself. And the critique group meets semi-regularly. I have one that meets every 2 weeks. I have another one that I've been in that meets once a month. It sort of depends on the members. And they can be any size from 4 people or so to 18 people to more than that, I suppose, although I have not personally experienced a critique group that's more than that. And people will submit manuscripts, there'll be rules about it, some protocols to follow, and so on. So I think critique groups are great. I will caveat that I think it's better, especially when you're beginning, to try to find a critique group that at least has a few other members that write SFF, because I've found from personal experience that sometimes people who are experienced in non-SFF genres aren't really your ideal reader for SFF stories, and they are more apt to get confused or to misunderstand or just not, ultimately you want readers that care about the genre that you're writing in. Otherwise it could get kind of demotivating and it won't be as useful to you, in my personal experience. However, that said, I've also had critique groups where there were a lot of literary fiction writers, and they eagerly came to my SFF stories and they gave great feedback and great notes. So it sort of depends on the reader, and it depends on their openness to your genre. A workshop is typically a little more formal. It's probably organized by person or institution. It may cost money. They can be a little more targeted. They could be part of a larger course, such as a college or MFA course. It's usually a little bit more of a formalized process of giving critique and submitting manuscripts and so on. That can also be useful. I will link down below a bunch of different writing workshops for SFF, and there are a lot that range quite a lot in price and time commitment. So I don't think all writers 100% need critique groups and workshops. I think it's pretty obvious how they could be helpful. They build community, they force you to get some words on paper because your critique partners are waiting for you to submit something. And discovering readers for your work and hearing their reactions can also be useful. But they can also be harmful. And I feel like, I don't know if this is an unpopular or controversial opinion or not, but I'm just going to say it anyway. A bad critique group is worse than no critique group. A bad critique group could demoralize you. It could make you feel crappy about your writing. It can make you feel like you need to suppress your voice that makes you uniquely you. It can make you feel like you shouldn't be doing this. It can be a waste of your time. I mean, that's a pretty low level bad for you, but there's some critique groups where the people in them aren't actually super interested in getting better as writers. Like, it becomes more of a social group, which is fine. Then turn it into a co-working, commiserating session, not a critique group. So I don't know if that's actively harmful to you, but it just won't help you progress. Ideally, a critique group should be made up of some people who at least read your genre, and other people who want to get better at their writing and really want to practice their craft and take it seriously. If it's also social and fun, that's awesome, but don't let that become the primary thing. Here's the other thing is, if you are a marginalized writer, it can be really demoralizing to join like an all-white, all cis, straight, white critique group. It can, and it can hurt you, I think, as a person, as a writer. So be aware of what you need and what your tolerance for white supremacy and homophobia. And it's not even overt homophobia. It's like if the other writers just don't get what you're trying to do. If you're a queer writer and you want to write about queer kids being queer and having fun, being gay and doing crimes, find other people that are interested and excited by that, Otherwise, it'll be a little bit like submitting your work into a void that just doesn't end. Similarly, if you exist in a marginalized body, it can be very demoralizing to interface with an all-white group or a all able-bodied group or all neurotypical group. So just be sensitive to that and see what you need out of it and try to find your peeps, whoever those peeps might be. Okay, so more on that tip. I'm going to expand a little bit on how some writing groups might actually be not good for you, harmful for you. And the corollary to that is that not all writing advice is also good for you. Especially when you're starting out. I know for me, I read like every craft book I could get my hands on, and I studied really hard, and I took people's writing advice, and I tried, when a writer said, oh, this is my process, I'd be like, great, I'm gonna try that process and see if it works for me. And actually, I don't think it's a bad way to start out. You're learning more about yourself as a writer. Why not try lots of different things? Why not see if advice applies to you? But I think the danger is when people start treating that advice as not individualized and as something universal and general. So when you hear things like show, don't tell. Yeah, show sometimes, but tell sometimes, right? That is not a universal piece of advice, even though it's often couched as a universal good piece of writing advice. So just be aware of that. Ultimately, learn to develop and trust your own instincts about what works for you. When a piece of advice resonates with you, then reflect on it, take it to heart, see if you can incorporate that into your writing. Otherwise, I'm giving you permission to reject that piece of advice. You don't have to be rude about it. I always say thank you when people give me advice, even if in my head I'm thinking, nope, not gonna do that. But you say thank you, they're trying. But yeah, you know, you'll learn to know what is best for you in your writing. And it might be different for every story too, that's the other thing. Some pieces of advice will work for some stories, but not for others, depending on what you're trying to do with the story. I know, writing is so hard, why can't it all be the same? So we can just like learn one piece of advice and apply it everywhere. That's not how it works though, at least not for me. Wow, I think I'm finally at the end of this video, which is a good thing because I feel like it's gone on a really long time and I've talked a lot, and I'm sorry about that. I can get a little gabby when I'm excited. So let's sum up part one. Read stories and pay attention to them. Read them, read prose intentionally. Read for the technical aspects of prose writing, as well as for enjoyment and story structure and all that other stuff. But read for the technical side of prose if you're new to writing prose. 2, start small and start simple. Build a writing practice, whatever that means to you. Build some writing habits, try different kinds of writing. Finish a story to the end, please. Don't worry about quality for now. Just worry about your writing. Find a sustainable writing routine. Maybe find some other people to write with if that appeals to you. Maybe join some communities. Maybe take a class or a workshop. Next time, I will follow up with the Absolute Beginner's Guide to Writing SFF Part 2, which will delve into a lot more of the specifics of what separates SFF from other genres and how you might approach those as a new writer. All right, friends, that is it for now. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please give us a like. Please subscribe if you're into that thing. And stay tuned for next week. See you next time.